Welcome. My name is Deidre Harris Kelly. I'm one of the co-directors of the Romeo Bearden Foundation. And on behalf of my co-director, Joanne Bryant Reed, and the board of directors, I want to welcome you to this evening of the last Cinque Artist Program of 2022. And I want to thank those of you who have been tuning in. Your support is really important to us. Welcome. The program, the Cinque Artist Program, takes its name from the Cinque Gallery that was founded in the 1960s by artists Romeo Bearden, Norman Lewis, and Ernest Critchlow. Before the gallery closed in the early 2000s, it was an opportunity for artists and curators of color to exhibit, but also acted as a catalyst for networking and building community. This is what we do now in terms of that legacy, carrying it on into the future. This is the foundation that has been holding Bearden's archives, library, and we produce exhibitions, symposia, and educational programs like this based around his art and the ideals of Romeo Bearden. We recently partnered with the Wildenstein-Platner Institute to publish the catalog Resonate, the ultimate guide to the artist's unique work. Please visit our websites for the foundation and WPI for more news on this important project. But tonight, we'll be talking about the projects of Charles Chuck Martin. We promise to leave time for Q&A, so if you're tuning in through Zoom, please type your questions into the chat box so we can see them. Chuck, I can call him Chuck. Chuck studied photography at the Yale School of Art. He's been showing extensively in both solo and group exhibitions since the mid-1980s and throughout the United States, Europe, and especially Brazil. His works can be found in public collections such as the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, the Museum of the City of New York, the Center for Photography at Woodstock, the Zimmerli Art Museum of the Rutgers University, and the famed Mott Walsh Art Collection in Flint, Michigan. Corporate collections include Pfizer and Keyspan, Brooklyn Union Gas. While at Yale University, sorry, it is an institution. He also received a master's degree and a doctorate in Spanish and Portuguese. He's been teaching comparative literature at Queens College for more than 20 years with an interest in autobiography, Black writers from around the world, and pairing photography and text. Please find his extensive CV at JuneKellyGallery.com, where he has been exhibiting for some time, most recently this year. So I want to welcome Charles Martin to our program and also ask that we show the first couple of slides, the first set of slides.
Thank you very much, Deidre. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to be here. This is a great pleasure.
The pleasure is ours, Charles. I put these up here because, you know, this is from the most recent June Kelly show. And, you know, let's get with it. You know, you're like the photographer, professor, writer, you're making films, but let's go back a little bit. Tell us a little bit about where and when you first picked up a camera and started your process.
I will say I'm a slow learner, so I have picked up the camera several times. I started out with a little Kodak Instamatic camera when I was a kid. My dad was a darkroom enthusiast. He built a darkroom, had a beautiful Rolleiflex camera that I still have. But, you know, from being with my dad, it was about being with my dad. I didn't really care about photography. I didn't really get into photography until I went to graduate school. Not in art, but in African-American studies.
Mm-hmm.
And I was about to go to Brazil, actually. And I was speaking with a Chinese-American friend of mine from my undergraduate days, which were also at Yale. And he mentioned to me that he had been to China. And of course I said, oh, did you take pictures? And he said, yeah, but evidently I didn't know how to use the camera because nothing came out. And that was like a message to me. I thought, oh, I'm being told something. And so I just went to the library all the time and started looking at books of photography and reading how-to magazines. And I went to Brazil, took pictures. And when I came back, people really liked them. And I did an exhibition, and I must say that one of the people I went to school with was Rick Powell, who's now an art historian, I think at Cinque University. Rick was the first person to buy one of my photographs, by the way. And he said to me, oh, Chuck, I want to look at your contact sheets. So I showed him my contact sheets, and he said that I had not only done a good job with my exhibition, but that I had, nice contact sheets, but I'd also made good selections. And so he just really was one of the people. And I've got to give my thanks to the great John Blasingame, who is the head of the Department of African American Studies at Yale. I went to him and asked him if I could get support for an exhibition. And, Blasingame, not the most playful fellow. And I always like to play with him. So, he was Mr. Businessman. And so I went into his office and sat around saying, how's the weather and so forth and so on. And he finally looked at me and he said, Chuck, are you here for a reason? And I said, of course. And so I gave him a written proposal and said, when you've had time to read this, you can get in touch with me. And I went home, and lo and behold, like one morning, Saturday morning at like 8 o'clock in the morning, Blasingame called me up and said, Chuck, do you have your proposal in front of you? Which of course I didn't. I said, well, no, but I'll get one. And he just went through it line by line, raised all the budget figures. And he did something that some artists would not approve of. He said to me, there's no line in this for you to print the photographs. He said, there's no line in this for the photographs to be printed. And I said, of course, because I'm going to print them. And he said, no, you're not. You're not going to have time.
Wow.
That just totally changed my attitude. And, the reality is that most photographers really don't print their photographs. There's the idea, some do, of course, but I really never printed much after that. I would just give my work to really good printers, and I've been very lucky to work with really good printers. So that's how I really got started.
Was this a show at Yale? Where was this show that you proposed?
Yes, the show was at the African American Cultural Center at Yale. And it was, I got to say, it was a really funny show. It was my photographs from Brazil and the photographs of a good friend of mine, Jesse Rhines, who had photographed in, I believe, Mali. And the idea of the show, we called it African Eyes, as in eyes, African Eyes, as in make something African, and then Brazil. And we gave out an exam, and the exam was to figure out which photographs were which. If you really played close attention, you could identify them, because sometimes in the African photographs, there might be a word of French, there might be a word of Portuguese in the Brazilian photographs. But only one person actually got the exam right. And the funniest thing was, these people would be so stumped, and they would come up to Jesse and I and say, that photograph, where is it from? And it was the first time, Jesse's also a professor, or we both became professors. It was the first time that we've ever had people, and for me, the only time, coming up begging to take the exam. So the exam was really fun. And that was my show with Jesse Rhines. And that was my first show ever. And I later had a solo show at the African American Cultural Center, another one at the Cross Campus Library at Yale, and it just kept showing after that. But that's how I started exhibiting.
Well, let's fast forward, because the slide that we're showing is from your last exhibition at June Kelly. And I know that a lot of your books seem to pull together themes. Are you thinking about these themes ahead of time? I noticed, some things that run through your work are, architecture, reflections. So tell us about this last show, what we're looking at.
Okay. There are some themes that run through my photographs consciously, and I look for them. There are some that I go through my work and I realize, oh my goodness, I've already been doing this. But metropolis is the idea that I really like the city, and that to me, cities have something in common. I love architecture, and so cities are certainly places where you see lots of architecture. But I also really like natural things in the city. I'm not like a nature person, although as a kid, I used to spend my summers on my relatives' farms in Virginia, so I know all about milking cows and all that sort of stuff. But I like looking at the city with a bit of lightness in it. So these two pictures here, the one on the left is obviously here in Manhattan, the Oculus. And in this case, aside from the scale that makes people so small, I just like the different layers of the light and the dark. And it also, to me, kind of suggests something like a labyrinth, I guess, egg crate or something, due to the distance here. Now, the picture on the right is again architecture, but I've also done a lot of photographs of clouds, and I photographed clouds. I've tried to tell myself I'm not allowed to do any more cloud photographs, but I have photographs of clouds that are sunrise or sunset, and this would be sort of during the sunset, so you have a bit of pink. I have them in reflections. I have them in a certain group of types. But this was, just walking through the city. And I would also say this particular photograph is a really good example of my interest in design. I really like design. And so, there's the black on the left, a strip of blue, a strip of sort of, I guess, brown or something like that to the right, and touches of the red. So, to me, I guess it was the 19th century French, I think, who were big on the idea of being flaneurs, i.e. that they walked through the city, and the idea was that you discovered things in the cities. And for me, you discover things, you see form, shape, objects, etc. And can we go to the reflection? Is the reflection next?
Yeah.
The reflections for me, oh, that's not, well, yeah, we'll look at the one on the left here. That's kind of interesting for me. Before we get to reflections, the form could just be, three objects and, blue. But the dark color object in the center is also, I think it's Noguchi. It's a piece of sculpture downtown, which I've also photographed. It's a beautiful piece of sculpture. And it's kind of a joke, or it's not a joke. It's a reformulation. You wouldn't look at this and necessarily know that it's Noguchi's sculpture. And if you do know that if you'd recognize it as Noguchi's sculpture, you'd go, oh, that's kind of another way of looking at it. And, for me, that's essentially what photography does, is it allows us to look at things differently. It allows us to concentrate on what we're looking at. Let me just say here, we'll get later, I'm sure, I know we'll get later to Ed Clark, who was a good friend of mine. And, Ed said to me one day, he's looking at my photographs. He said, do you develop the film? And I said, no. And he said, well, do you print the photographs? And I said, no. And he said, wow, you've perfected it. All you do is look. And that's exactly it. That's what I like to do. That to me is what photography really is. There is, of course, the side of documentation. I mean, the object on the right, the photograph on the right, you could look at that as a document of the way that the oculus looks at a certain time of day with light and so forth and so on. But it's really just looking at, it's seeing form, it's seeing shape. That's probably less likely when we're looking at portraits. When you look at portraits, people really do expect to see a person and recognize the person. And there's, I think, probably less interest in form. And that's brings me to another thing that Ed Clark said to me once. Ed said that abstract art might be considered, a wonderful format, but he said, but human beings will always want to see themselves. So figurative art will always exist.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why people have been so reluctant to accept photography as other than a document. They really want to say that thing is real. That's the way it really is. It's asking for an assurance that in life we really don't have. People can always make up things, and we know that words lie, that words are deceptive, that words create, and we would like to think that this mechanically produced object is somehow true. So
you look for the abstract in these natural forms.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I'm really interested in shape and nowadays I work 99% in color. I used to work almost exclusively in black and white when I was shooting with film. And in some ways, I kind of prefer color because I think that my photographs have a certain kind of classic look. And I look like I was in the 50s or something when I'm shooting in black and white. Whereas color, I think, for me, looks a little more up to date. Now,
let's look at a couple of other slides while you're saying that.
Yeah, well, let me just mention that Picture New York, that's from a book of photographs by the Museum of Modern Art. And it's also an exhibition that traveled. And the photograph on the right is in that exhibition. Okay, we can go ahead. Now, this is, again, another picture of reflections. I only had this thought, within the last year. But, when I was a kid, aside from the darkroom with my father loved aquariums. We had like 3 tanks of tropical fish. We used to breed fish, and they were always, it was always a big deal. My dad made his own tank. It's a really big tank. And I thought about it, and in the reflections, this one here doesn't really have it. I don't think any of this particular series do. But when I first started shooting them, and that was way back in the beginning in graduate school, I saw them as what I called glass constructions. And the ideal, or not the ideal, but the possibility of the glass construction was that there was something on the surface of the glass, which in this case, the glass is not evident. But some of them have something on the surface, like a mark, a scratch, whatever it might be. And then beyond the surface, there's something inside. And in this case, it would be those things that we see
right
on this counter and so forth. And then there's things that are behind us that are the reflection. Okay. Now, of course, when you're looking at the photographs, sometimes you can tell, sometimes you can't. What are the various levels? And as I said, all of the photographs don't necessarily have all of the 3 levels. Now, again, it's kind of funny to me, and it's kind of a joke, but one of the strange categories in photography that can be talked about is the manipulated photograph, as in things have been done, it's been redone. And I remember once seeing a call for manipulated photographs. And so, I mean, the photograph that I have here that we're looking at could have been, multiple exposures, but it's not. And so I sent them a reflection as a manipulated photograph, and they accepted it. I thought that was the ultimate manipulation, was that I was manipulating them to believe it had been manipulated, because in fact, sometimes you can tell, but you often can't tell the way a photograph is made or what goes into it. We would like to think, again, that it's understandable, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. let me just say that this photograph,
Hmm.
uh, well, we can go to the next one. But the last one was photographed in southern France. And when I went to southern France to visit a friend of mine, I consciously decided to shoot reflections because I didn't really have much interest in shooting the countryside. Um, Now, this photograph here is this is a if you skip the right side of the photograph, you do actually have the three surfaces. You have the window with a frame, and there's a sign inside, and we know that it's inside because you can read it correctly. And then there's the reflections behind. But in this case, I also included the outside because there's the play of the reflection on the window against the actual sunset. And these sunsets, I was at one point walking along 14th Street like every night, going to pick up my wife, who happens to be from Brazil and who works as a wine specialist in Manhattan. And it was that period of time, about I guess three months ago, where sunset was occurring around 7:30. So I would see sunset every single night, and that's part of my usual method also. I'll photograph things just because they happen in front of me, but photography is often about photographing just literally wherever you are. Just take out the camera and take
Right.
pictures. And I think a lot of people forget that part of photography is just picking up the camera and looking through it. If you don't see something without the camera, when you pick up the camera, you probably will see something, and then you can twist it around, move it, and so forth and so on. So, you could, I don't know how Ansel Adams really worked, but, you could have the image yourself and then just go and take the camera and capture it, or you can set up the camera and see what's in it. I kind of look at the camera as a kind of a Pandora's box and look and see what's in it and, take the pictures.
Although the next couple of slides are, more posed pictures.
Yes, but the poses are quick.
Mhm.
Let me start off with the woman with her chin on her hand. That is, of course, Angela Davis. I took this picture in New Haven. I really don't remember the occasion. I mean, she was giving a speech, and I went to go see the speech, and there was a dinner beforehand, and I don't know why, but the organizer said to me, "Oh, you should sit with Angela Davis." And she's not somebody that I know. It's the only time I've ever met her. And so, we sat, and she was very pleasant. We had a very nice conversation. And of course, I'm a great fan of Angela Davis. And I said to her, I asked if it would be okay if I took her picture. And she said yes. And I, at that point, was a Leica user. And, I always say that the Leica camera, it's not a group of users, it's a cult. They go crazy over the camera. I've stopped using them, but I took out my little camera. And of course, one of the nice things about Leicas, and I'm talking about the rangefinder camera, which means that it's almost silent, was that it was really quiet and it's small. That's why I liked it. And I took out the camera, and she just kind of lit up and said, "Oh, I used to have one of those."
Ah.
And so she just kind of was totally happy with it. And again, it's Angela Davis, but if you didn't know it was Angela Davis, it would just be a portrait of a person. And
And let me just say, I know when we were putting together these materials, I noticed that there weren't any titles individually, and you had something to say about that. What,
yeah, I prefer not to title my things because to me, the title is a suggestion of how to look at it. And oftentimes we like to accept the idea of the creator of the image as the way it should be seen. I think that you should be able to look at the image and respond to it any way that you want to. And I think the title is sometimes a suggestion, but it can also be limiting.
Yes.
And I just think you should be able to look at something and enjoy it. I mean, if somebody didn't know that that was Angela Davis and they thought it was just about a gaze, that's fine, you know. Or if somebody thought it was about hair, I don't have a problem with that, you know. I don't necessarily know that they have to know what I was taking the picture of. And it also raises another issue, and that is, of course, the title is more than intention, but our productions, whatever they are far beyond our intentions. You know, Miles Davis used to say that if you were playing music, there was no mistake until you failed to follow it up in an interesting way. You know, he was saying that, you know, you do what you need to do, and nobody's gonna, you know, if you, right now it's obviously World Cup soccer. Okay. In soccer or in any sport, you know, if a goal is made by accident, it's okay. No one cares what the intention was. The idea is it's a goal, you know. And to me, photography is kind of the same way. You're looking at an image. Now that said, I will just point out on the right, that's Toni Morrison.
Mhm.
And I taught many Toni Morrison novels when I was a professor of comparative literature. And that's actually at NYU, where she was a visitor to the retirement party for the wonderful, what is Clyde's last name? Oh my goodness, his name escapes me at the moment, but Clyde and I went to Brazil together. He's a wonderful professor, and he and Toni Morrison were very good friends. Then below Toni Morrison is a young,
Just a girl from the block. That's what she looks like. Just you would never know.
exactly, exactly. So that's a young Angie Bassett, who I, our paths just crossed in New Haven, where she was at the Yale Drama School. And I mean, it's irrelevant, but for me, part of the humor of the picture is that I was using this cheap camera that I bought for $5 in a secondhand store, and you couldn't focus with it. You couldn't do anything with the thing. But I loved using it, and I was fortunately relieved of having to use the camera because it was stolen from my car in Brooklyn one day. So I was relieved of that. And then the picture on the top left is Ornette Coleman, the wonderful musician. And that photograph was at his house. I was invited to his house by a friend of his, who's a friend of mine. And he was really into playing pool. He was a great pool player. I'm not. And he just destroyed me several times. And he was willing to be photographed. And I might add that Ornette had a beautiful painting of Ed Clark, which I photographed it. And my understanding is that in moving it, the thing was destroyed. But he was a fan of Ed Clark.
Okay. Well, let's move on because we do want to see that film. So
Yes,
let's
yes.
a couple of photos. This is you in Algiers, and you're in front of one of your photographs that are split into panels. That's a different kind of presentation, right?
Yeah, I again, being a fan of design, I like variation of just presentation. And I was working with a great designer, the late Marvin Hoshino, who also worked for Helen Levitt. There are a number of photographs, photographic books by Jules Allen that were also done by Marvin. I introduced the two of them actually. And this show in Algiers, um, you know, when they were ready to do the show, I said to them, well, you know, we have a budget issue. How are you going to ship the photographs? And they said, can't you just give us the files? And Marvin nearly fell over because he said, we'd never considered that once we produced images, that other people would just want to produce them themselves. And so that's what we did. So we just sent them the stuff. And I said to Marvin, I would like to have some stuff split up, and he took care of that. What we're looking at now, this is the museum. This exhibition was in the Museum of Fine Art in Algiers. The bottom floor was a German artist. The second floor was all mine, and the top floor was a consortium of artists from I think they were Palestinians. This now we're looking at the book that preceded the exhibition, and I must say that the exhibition produced another version of the book, a catalog. Now, in the original book, there are images from New York, there are images from Brazil, there are images from Algiers. The catalog only showed work from Algiers. On the right, though, this is one of the first buildings I saw in Algiers. It's a huge auditorium where they were having this major pageant. I went to Algiers for a Pan-African cultural conference. Clyde Taylor, that's the name, I forgot, Clyde Taylor. And Clyde went to this conference as well. And that building that we just left, like the building here with the two windows that kind of looks like eyes, these are buildings that were designed by the Brazilian architect Oscar Niemeyer. And I recognized the first building as, this looks like a Niemeyer, but I had no idea. In fact, during the years of Brazilian dictatorship, he'd gone into exile, lived in Algiers, and built 2 universities there. And the last time I was in Algiers, I had the pleasure of flying out to the western part of the eastern part of the country, where the photograph on the left was taken, which happens to have clouds, happens to have sunrise, but that's a university that Niemeyer built. And I literally had gotten there about sunrise. And to the right, on the right side of the picture, that's another Niemeyer building. It's in a little town called Niterói, which is next to Rio. Now, aside from the museum, we're going to get to, I think, my photographs from the ferry boat. When I did the book on the ferry boat, people would look at it and they would tell me about various ferries. And one of the ferries was Niterói. And so I went to, when I was in Rio, I said, oh, let me take the ferry. And then someone said to me, well, there's a Niemeyer structure in Niterói. So I was like 2 in 1. Okay. Now, that last photograph, let's just go back to that photograph 1 second, if we can. This one here. This was taken in Bahia. It's too dark for you to be able to read, but in the kind of dark line above the man's head is the word Yoruba. Okay. And of course, the Yoruba, Nigerian and other parts of West African culture, is very much one of the African influences in much of Brazil. And of course, it's talked about all the time in Bahia, but it's not in any way limited to Bahia. But even though it says Yoruba, when I set up this photograph, and I did arrange this, you see the 4 people, not the small figure in the back. But this to me was a joke, because it was a reference to Robert Farris Thompson, the art historian's book called The 4 Moments of the Sun, which is about not Yoruba, but about Congo culture. And I had been a teaching assistant for Thompson in graduate school. And in fact, when I was one of his teaching assistants, or not as a teaching assistant, but when I was taking one of his graduate classes, that's where I really got to perfect, back at those times, twin slide projection, because that's what art historians would do. And so it was really fun. Oddly enough, when I went to Brazil for the first time, I said to Thompson, because he's a big fan of, African diaspora things, I asked him what he could tell me about Rio, about Brazil. And the only thing he said to me, without any explanation whatsoever, was Tijuca. And so I figured, well, that's all I'm getting. So that was the end of that conversation. And when I went to Rio, I found out that Tijuca is a little town, or it's an area in the general vicinity of Rio. And one of my very good friends, who I was on a Zoom thing last night in Brazil, is from Tijuca. So, uh, okay.
Let's skip to just a few of the Staten Island photos, only because if we don't, we're not going to get any film in here.
Right, no, let's get to the film.
Yeah,
I used to live in Staten Island, so I rode the ferry every day. Here again, we have.
you know, I was born on Staten Island, so
I,
shout out from the Staten Islanders that hold on the line.
Absolutely, shout out. And so, the photograph on the left has another thing that I like, which is motion, movement. And for me, motion can be produced by either slow exposure on the camera, sometimes with slower exposure on the camera and also moving the camera, or just things themselves that are moving quickly. So that's there. And, the ferry boat was just, it was my ride every day. And I've seen the ferry, I've seen New York Harbor frozen from the ferry boat. It's a wonderful, wonderful ride. And I'll just, say that people often ask me, why do my ferry boat pictures look so peaceful? Because many of them don't have any people in them. And I would just say, you wait till there's no people and then you take the picture. Photography is choices, it's selections. And in order to
One book too, I just want to point this out before they move on with the slide, was that this is a case where you are putting the words with the photos. The photos don't seem to have any titling, and you write this essay. Is that about riding the ferry?
Yes, it is about riding the ferry, but it's also about the idea that New York is ultimately a maritime place, that we forget that it's a place about water and air, and also that the ferry boat is, among other things, aside from being transportation, it's also a tremendously calming place. If you ride the ferry in the morning, there are all these people who are just completely relaxed, and then they get ready like the last 5 minutes to run, so it's a real place of refuge, and that I really liked about the ferry. Let me just add parenthetically that unfortunately, that picture on the left is a bin where the cars used to travel. After the attack on the World Trade Center, cars were no longer allowed to travel on the ferry because there was a fear that there could be a bomb. Okay, and so that doesn't.
That's the other thing that your photographs do, is you really document. Even though that's not always your intention, you're documenting, and that's why the films are so important. Like this next clip we're going to see, or this first clip, is on the Ed Clark, and the late great Ed Clark, painter, abstract painter. Besides just being a very engaging film, this is like raw, beautiful footage of him just working. So I just want to say quickly, we're not going to get a chance to show all 4 of these clips. Obviously, we've been over a little bit, but you can go to a site that Chuck has arranged to show all of his films. Chuck, do you want to just say a little bit about the Ed Clark, what we're going to see?
Yeah, quickly, we'll see him at work. And when I make film, and we'll see people talking about his work. When I make movies, I like to have people present themselves. I like to do it with, generally speaking, without a narrator. And so I get the people to talk about, what they're doing and so forth and so on. This particular film came about, as I said, we were friends. I'd go hang out at his house all the time. And when I'd be in his house, the first thing I would do would be to go look at his studio. And one day I just said to him, I said, Ed, has anybody ever made a film about you? And he said, they always say they're going to, but nobody's done it. And I said, Ed, I'm going to do it. And so I had done some stuff on my own. I had done still photographs for a really excellent filmmaker. And he was shocked when I asked him if he would be my director of photography and I would direct him, but he agreed to do it. And Ed was tickled by the idea, and he was extremely helpful. He arranged for me to talk to various people. And those people were all incredibly happy to participate, and we'll see some of that.
Mhm. And why don't we just play the first clip for the Ed Clark, and then maybe a few, and then a minute or two of the Warren Smith.
Oh, let me just add one more thing too. The film has, I'm a big music fan, has wonderful music. I don't remember exactly who the music is by, not all of it, but I think that this film's the bulk of the music is by Faron Akalaf, who's a good friend of mine and a tremendous musician, and Oliver Lake, who's also a tremendous musician.
Mhm. Okay, let's hit it. So we're going to see the first couple of minutes of this.
And he walked over to some guy and started talking, and then introduced me and said, "Oh, and yes, and this is Ed Clark." And I was like, "Wow!" And it was so odd.
And so in Paris, there must have been about 4 schools: Ferdinand Leger, Julian, Andre Lotte, and the Academy Le Grand Chimere, and the Beaux-Arts. Well, I didn't need the Beaux-Arts. I'd already been to the damn Beaux-Arts. That's Chicago Art Institute, the similar school, structured. So I chose the Academy Le Grand Chimere because it was a laid-back, with the academy, it means like a workshop, but it's just, you just could just show up. And it was open all year, so I didn't know when I left Chicago how I would have managed in the summer. The others closed and you didn't get your bill if it was closed, but that was open, so that's why I chose it. I didn't make a mistake.
I mean, when I got there, I must have been 18 or 19, and Ed was about 23. So he was a young star, you know, showing at the best galleries in Paris. I was always highly impressed with his work in those days, and I still am. He was showing all over Paris, and a leading light of the American art world in France.
I realized I needed the studio desperately, the way I paint. Kind of, you know, even then, kind of expressionist way with paint going everywhere. You couldn't do it in the hotel room. Buford Delaney was there, he could. And you don't have to be a great painter to be sloppy, because you could be, I heard Paul Klee painted over a Oriental rug.
Wow. Wow.
Let me just say that was the that is the great Warren Smith, who is a composer, used to run a loft music scene in Chelsea. He is a multi-instrumentalist. He's the guy who was playing all the instruments there, the timpani, the mallets, the drums. He used to be my music teacher, actually. And so I we're in touch, and I just asked, he was telling me about this music he was working on. That's a song that was called Save Your Love for Me. It was performed by Nancy Wilson with Cannibal Adderley. And I mean, Warren has done so much stuff. He plays classical music, he plays jazz, he worked with Tony Williams. He was the music director for Janis Joplin at one point.
Wow.
He's done everything that there is to do. Avant-garde. He's the guy. He's the guy. And so this is
you're showing him playing all of the instruments, and then somehow you mix it so that it works visually and audibly. How did you do that?
Well, the audio part was done with a metronome or with a beat. In other words, in some of the shots, you can see he's wearing headphones, and what he's listening to is just the rhythm, or not the rhythm, just a click, so that he's always in the same time. And then I shot that along with a friend of mine, Phil Sexton, who's a fine video guy as well as a guitar player. And we just went and shot him and asked him to play the song multiple times on the instruments. And then I edited it together. And although I don't really remember now whether you're only hearing 2 mallets or there might be more. But Warren is very flexible. And I took the approach. I was inspired by basically the great Teo Macero's work with Miles Davis on the album Bitches Brew. And that is Miles has played what he wanted to, and Teo went and edited it. And that's what I did. And then I would, show it to Warren, and Warren said, sounds fine. So that's how that.
And was this a film that you were making for a performance that he was doing, or a video? I mean, it's literally a video for that song, but
no, he has a workspace in the Bronx in an art center, and I knew he had the space, and I knew he was working on the song, and so I don't remember whether I suggested it or he suggested it. I think I suggested it, that I would film him doing the whole thing, so he was a one-man band. And I kind of had the idea because I've done I think 4 films on Warren. And one of them is called Playing New York. And I literally follow him around New York City, playing different objects in the city. And again, you talk about being documentary. The film immediately became documentary because many of the spaces disappeared. Okay. In filming him, I had the idea. I said, I'd like to be able to use the different sounds from different places on top of each other. So I asked him, could he play with a click track, so that he could play like 5 or 6 different rhythms, 5 or 6 different styles, but then I could later put them together. And again, when I put them together, he was totally happy with them.
I would really love for everyone to go to the site and see that film again and watch it, knowing that, that's how you put it together, and to see the other clips that we didn't have time to show, and to point out that one very important film that you made, and talking about, a document, is on the late, great Vivian Hewitt, who was a collector and supporter of the arts. And this film is she's lovely. She's so powerful in this film.
Absolutely.
Yes. So please, and this is a film that's shot in her home, which is beautiful. So go to that. I'm sorry that we don't have enough time, but we do have a couple of questions. So I did want to leave a little bit of time. One question comes about your decades of practice of Tai Chi. How has that affected your artwork?
Well,
that's interesting. Or maybe it
Right,
hasn't.
let me just say, no. Right at this moment, I'm editing a film that I shot on Tai Chi. With various masters of Tai Chi, usually doing one particular style. So the Tai Chi has affected my production in that I'm working on something. But Tai Chi is essentially an incredibly relaxing, slowing thing to do. And so it's been just a really wonderful thing for me. Now, of course, Tai Chi is, as people often forget, it's a remarkable martial art. But the reality is that, let's face it, people who are going to attack you are not going to use Tai Chi. They're going to probably use weapons. And in the old day, Tai Chi was, that's what it was about. It was, being a military form. So it's just been a wonderful, comforting thing. And my teacher, who was William Chen, I keep running into people that know William Chen. It's very interesting. And so that's kind of nice. And it's a very small little.
Will he be featured in the film?
Pardon me?
Will he be featured in the film on Tai Chi?
No, he won't be in the film because at that time, Master Chen was starting a video series of his own. So he didn't want to give out anything that wouldn't be under his own label, shall we say. But I do have, William Chen was a student of the great Chen Man Cheng, and one of the people in the film is a wonderful photographer, Ken Van Sickle, who was a student of Chen Man Cheng. And I know we're short for time, but let me just say that I met Ken, so I thought, at a film shoot where I was assisting a director, and Ken was the camera person. We were shooting the great Sam Shaw, who's known best for his photographs of Marilyn Monroe, but who was also producer for John Cassavetes and others. And when we went back, we got a ride together, and we got at his house. And I said, "This is funny. This is right around the corner from Ed." And he said, "Oh, Ed's a good friend of mine, Ed Clark." And so the next time I saw Ed, I said, "I met this guy as a friend of yours." And Ed, trust me, his house was always a total wreck. I mean, just was a total mess. He said, "You didn't meet him before. I introduced you to Ken." I said, "What?" And he looked around in all this mess, and he pulled out a photograph that he had taken of Ken and I. And he said, "I introduced you guys because I figured you guys would get along." So he did. He did.
Another question comes from Maren Strange. I don't know if this is someone you know, but she says, "Hi, Chuck.
Hello.
Super great stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. My 30-year-old daughter is about to quit her job and travel the world taking photos. I gave her 2 of your books for guidance. Might you have any guidance or advice or additional advice beyond the books?"
Yeah, my advice would be get a good camera that is small, be inconspicuous, don't bother people. Ask if you can photograph people. Lots of places in the world, it used to be that people loved being photographed. Now that's not the case. And I always say to my daughters, who were both very good photographers as very little, and one of them has gone on to become kind of a video person. She's become a producer of video. I used to always say, if somebody doesn't want to be photographed, you don't need them. There are a million photographs out there. So just, be inconspicuous, be easygoing. And if you do that, I think the photographs, the camera will extend your friendships. I in Algeria, which is not always the easiest place to be, I would have my little camera, and people would just crowd around me and ask me to photograph them. And I never had any problems, but I don't work usually with a big camera. That's just my particular approach. I like something really small, inconspicuous, and keep it with you at all times. I carried mine in a small bag. Some people put it on their shoulder. I wouldn't expose the camera. I would just, when it seems it's appropriate to take a picture, take out the camera, take the picture, and then put it away. But don't walk around with the camera out. I wouldn't do that.
Well, a follow-up technical question is there an element of revision or editing in your photography process?
Oh, well, Cartier-Bresson, the French photographer, liked to show his work with the edge around what was the contact sheet, and that was to demonstrate that he never manipulated anything. However, one of his most famous photographs, if you go actually look at the contact sheet, he did edit that photograph. Okay, so he didn't do it that much. I, for a long time, tried not to edit my photographs also, not for the same reason, but because I really like doing slideshows. And if you do slideshows back with 35mm film, it's very difficult to edit the slide. Okay, so I would try and frame everything. Now, that being said, you have to realize technology is awesome. Okay, nowadays when I photograph, I don't edit them firsthand because it's just, to me, a waste of time. I would prefer to frame it initially. But when I'm on my computer, if there's something I want to change, I will just change it because it's so incredibly easy. I mean, it's shocking. I mean, it used to be, you'd be in the dark room, you'd be moving your hands around to try and make a little adjustment, but that stuff is over. And if you wanted to be a purist, you can be, but there's no reason. I don't make it a practice, but if I just see something small, I'll take it out. Like, you can see the image of me here. If I decide, oh, that was really bad framing, I should get rid of that white part, I just cut it out. Why not?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have one more question, which I think it'll have to be our last question, but when you're talking about editing and pulling things out and changing the frame, it makes me think about all of the books that you've made, sort of this inclination that you have to put the pictures together or put the photographs together that tell a story. How did that process come about?
Yeah, well, the books are one thing, they're lasting, but I like the idea of, organizing something so that there's a story that's told. So right now I'm actually working on two projects. One is going to be called, or one is called Path Brazil, which should be a compendium of my many years of photography in Brazil. And the other one's called Optical Thinking, which is the name of my first solo exhibition. And, I'm pulling together different components in sections to show various things. I would be remiss, though. Let me change the subject altogether. I want to show this little medal.
Yes.
This medal is from the Academy of Letters in the north of Brazil, the state of Maranhão, which they gave me for the work I've done for the last 40 years on Maria Firmina dos Reis, who is now like a household word in some households in Brazil. When I wrote about her, she was an unknown. And so I just got this thing in the mail yesterday. I'm not going to melt it down and sell it. I'm going to keep it. But yeah, I mean, books are.
Thank you for sharing that. We really, and I know that you were just on another Zoom last night, streaming from Brazil.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. It was as fun as this one has been.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Well, I just want to thank you for coming and sharing with us and for hanging out and for talking and letting me cut you off and all of that. We had so much content. We need a part two. Which
thank you for having me, and thank you for cutting me off so well.
I tried to do it gracefully.
You did. Wonderful.
But I do want to thank also our producer, Nadal Canary, who really makes us look good, and for Joanne and Ron Jackson, who are behind the scenes with us, sending all of the links and everything that people can find you, Charles. And we're looking just forward to more shows, more books, more films. And thank you so much, everyone, for participating, and also to Harlem One Stop, one of our partners in producing these shows. Yes, you had something to say?
Yeah, my next show, it's not a solo show, but I'll be in a show in January at the Museum of the City of Sao Paulo.
Oh, fabulous. And so will you be making a book that we'll be able to see?
I
Did you
don't,
think
I
this
don't,
is
I
it?
don't think so. I think this is an independent thing. Maybe it'll help me produce the book or something, but that's something I am aware that's happening.
Okay, well, hopefully you'll post some on your site and we'll be able to see.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Thank you much.
So,
Thank you
everyone,
very
good night. And thank you again, Charles, for joining us. And I hope everyone has a wonderful, beautiful holiday season and a happy new year. We'll see you next year. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.